The world you live in is mapped, measured, explained. Your phone knows where you are. Textbooks tell you how we got here. The past feels settled, finished. But it isn't. Beneath the jungle, under the ice, etched into stone, lie fragments that don't belong. Artifacts that whisper one terrifying truth. History is not complete. In this journey, you won't just watch the mystery. You'll walk into it. You'll be the one. Who brushes dirt from forgotten glyphs? Who lights the torch in the cave? Who stands in the ruins and realizes this was never supposed to exist? And if that's true, what else have we forgotten? Because this isn't just about the past. It's about the story you're still inside of. And the pieces waiting for you to find them. The air in the cave was cold and still like the breath of time itself. My hands trembled slightly as I brushed away the last layer of dust. What emerged was not treasure, not bone, but something far more unsettling. 3 tablets, crude, baked in clay, but etched with symbols too structured to be random. They had been buried here, near the village of Tărtăria in Romania. The carbon dating placed them at over 7,000 years old. And that was impossible. These were the Tărtăria tablets. Strange, palm-sized relics first unearthed in 1961 by archaeologist Nicolae Vlasa. From the moment they were pulled from the earth, they defied everything we thought we knew about history. Because if the symbols on these tablets are indeed writing true writing, then they predate Sumerian cuneiform by nearly 2,000 years. That's not a revision. That's a collapse. The tablets bear signs of the Vinca culture, a Neolithic people who flourished in the Balkans long before Mesopotamia built its ziggurats. Most archaeologists saw Vinca symbols as decorative, maybe proto-religious, but the Tărtăria tablets are different. One shows a tree, a stag, and a series of incised lines all arranged deliberately. Another has what looks like a grid, flanked by twin vertical columns. And the third looks like a seal, an identity, a voice. And here's the fracture in time. The lines and symbols on these clay slivers bear uncanny resemblance to early Sumerian pictographs. Not just stylistically, but in content. Repeating characters, structured syntax, not pictures meaning. Some scholars insist it's coincidence, that the markings are religious symbols at best, but others quietly, cautiously propose a darker thought. What if writing didn't originate in Sumer? What if the Balkans had their own script? Long lost, long buried, that somehow bled eastward through forgotten migrations or vanished cultures? And if writing began here, what else did? The tablets themselves were found with bones, cattle and human, and traces of fire. A ritual? A burial? A warning? The female skeleton beside the tablets had no feet. Her hands were crossed. Her body baked. The cave had no name, but it felt like a tomb for truth. What shakes me most is not the age of the symbols, but the thought behind them. Someone 7,000 years ago had an idea they needed to preserve, a message they believed would outlast them. Perhaps they were wrong, but perhaps it did. Because here we are, kneeling over ancient clay, trying to read a whisper from before history had a name. This discovery hasn't rewritten textbooks. It hasn't been embraced. It lingers on the fringe, too bold, too early, too disruptive. But I've learned this on the trail of the erased epochs. History isn't a line. It's a wound, one that heals unevenly. Some things vanish, some things survive, and some things return when we're ready. As I stood in that cave, the torchlight caught the edge of the tablet. The symbols seemed to shimmer not with magic, but with intent, as if they weren't meant to be understood, only found. Another shard of the past that doesn't belong. Another mystery that breaks the laws of history. And the feeling once again crept in. We are not the first to seek meaning, only the latest to forget it. The river was quiet. Early morning mist curled over the limestone. The air smelled of wet stone and sun-warmed grass. We had come looking for fossils, but what we found was something else entirely. Tracks, pressed deep into the rock. Fossilized footprints. Some were massive, three-toed, reptilian, undeniably dinosaur. But others were human, barefoot, with defined arches, toes, and stride. Side by side, with the ancient giants and the limestone beneath our boots, dated to over 100 million years ago. That's not a misreading. That's not exaggeration. That's Cretaceous stone. Long before primates, long before humans, before us. The Paluxy River runs through Glen Rose, Texas. In the 1,930 seconds these tracks were first noticed, locals called them the man tracks, footprints beside dinosaurs. And for nearly a century, the debate has raged. Some say they're hoaxes, chiseled fakes carved into stone. Others say they're misinterpreted, dinosaur tracks eroded to look human, a trick of time and water. But then, we measured them. We followed their stride. We watched as they crossed paths with ancient predators, and we saw what textbooks could not explain. In one sequence, the human-like track actually steps inside a dinosaur print. Carefully, deliberately, not over it, not beside it, inside it. What does that mean? That something was there after the dinosaur passed? Or before? How could that be? No scientific theory holds both in its hands. You must pick one and reject the other. But here in the stone, they stand together. And there are more of them. Hidden tracks, partially buried, others weathered with time. But the pattern repeats. What if the dating is wrong? What if the tracks are younger and the rock misleads us? But no. Multiple independent tests confirm the stone's age. It is ancient, unforgiving, truthful. Then we ask, what if history is incomplete? What if something walked this earth before we were supposed to exist? Some theories push timelines back, suggest unknown hominids. Some invoke interdimensional visitors, time travelers, even ancient civilizations erased by catastrophe. Too far-fetched? Perhaps. But explain the footprints. You can't unsee them. They're there, pressed into stone that remembers better than we do. Some paleontologists say erosion played a trick, that we see what we want to see. But the depth, the contour, the spacing, they tell a different story. A story of coexistence, or at least of overlapping shadows, from creatures not meant to share a timeline. When I stood over those tracks, kneeling beside one of the human impressions, I pressed my palm into its shape, and it fit perfectly, as if someone like me had once walked this way, chased by thunder lizards, or walking beside them. Was it a warning? A glitch? A mistake in the rock record? Or was it the truth? Left out because it doesn't fit? That's the danger of maps, of timelines, of history that insists it knows everything. Because every so often, a footprint appears where no foot should have been, and we're reminded that stone tells no lies, but it keeps secrets well. Another fracture in the known world, another echo that doesn't belong. And yet, it's there, clear, human, ancient. I looked out across the riverbed, mist rising like smoke from a forgotten fire, and I felt it again. We are walking in someone else's footprints, and we don't even know their name. The torch crackled in my hand. Its light danced across ancient stone. We were deep inside the temple of Seti I, Abydos, sacred ground for the gods of Egypt. The walls told stories, kings, battles, offerings to Osiris, the usual. But then we looked up. High on the ceiling, above a lintel beam, were carvings unlike any I'd seen in Egypt, unlike any I'd seen anywhere. Shapes emerged from the shadows. Not hieroglyphs, not birds or reeds or eyes, but machines. I blinked. We adjusted the light. Looked again. There it was, clear as stone. A helicopter. Behind it, what looked like a modern tank. A submarine. A jet. These weren't vague. They weren't accidental. The forms were crisp, recognizable, modern, and yet they were carved thousands of years ago. What were they doing here? On a temple wall dated to 3,000 years ago? Long before turbines, long before combustion, before flight itself. The mainstream answer came quickly. A palimpsest, they said. An overlap of two sets of glyphs, one carved over another. The result? A coincidence. A fluke of erosion. But that's not what I saw. These figures weren't chaotic. They were clean, intentional, aligned with purpose. And even if they were an accident, what are the odds that two overlapping sets of ancient symbols would just happen to create the image of 20th century aircraft? And why only here? Why not in every temple, where erosion played its tricks? No, there was something deliberate here. Some say it's proof of ancient technology, of lost civilizations that rose before recorded time and vanished without trace. Others whisper of gods, who came not from the Nile, but from the stars. Abydos was no ordinary temple. It was sacred to Osiris, a gateway to the afterlife, to rebirth. But maybe, just maybe, it was also a vault of knowledge too dangerous to keep in the open. Egyptian texts speak of the Zep-Tepi, the first time, an age when gods walked the earth, when the Nile ran under different stars. Could these images be memory from that time? Or warnings from another? When I stood beneath those carvings, my breath caught, not from the heat, not from the awe, but from the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be seeing this, that it had waited for someone to look up. The locals don't speak of it. They call it cursed, tampered with, but they avoid it all the same. And I've learned, in this work, when even the believers grow silent, that's when you're close to something real. The beam above us bore the weight of time, of dynasties, of dogma, but the images carved there seemed to pierce through it all. They didn't belong, and yet they remained. Stone doesn't dream. It doesn't imagine machines. It remembers. And somewhere, somehow, someone carved a vision of the future into the ceiling of the past. Another riddle left in plain sight. Another whisper from an age that knew more than it should. I left the temple that evening with dust on my hands and questions that haven't let go since. Because history tells us that flight was born at Kitty Hawk. That submarines came centuries later. But Abydos says otherwise. And I've learned to listen when the stone speaks. The jungle was thick with breath. Leaves whispered secrets overhead, and the stone stairs of Paluxy were slick with time. We descended slowly, beneath the Temple of the Inscriptions, into the heart of a Maya tomb. Dark, quiet, heavy with memory. At the end of the passage rested a massive limestone sarcophagus. Its lid, carved in astonishing detail, drew my eyes first. This was the tomb of Kinich Janab Pakal, Pakal the Great, a Maya ruler who died over 1,300 years ago. His body was found within, adorned with jade and mystery. But it was the lid, not the bones, that shattered my sense of time. I stared at it, then knelt beside it, and slowly it revealed itself. Pakal is depicted lying back, but not resting, not at peace. He's leaning forward, gripping what looks like a control panel. His feet press against pedals. His hands hover near switches. A breathing tube stretches from his face. Below him, flames, or thrusters. Around him, intricate machinery, cables, spindles, a nose cone shape beneath his head. It looked less like a funerary carving, and more like an astronaut launching into space. Many dismissed it. They say it's symbolic, mythical, a tree of life, the underworld, the heavens, and perhaps it is. But when you're there, seeing it in person, not filtered through books or theory, you feel something else. A message, encoded, preserved, carved not just for beauty, but for memory. Eric von Däniken called it the Palenque astronaut, an ancient spaceman launched into eternity. And while many mock the idea, they cannot unsee the form. Even NASA engineers, shown the image without context, described it as a man in a launch posture. Coincidence? Maybe. But the Maya were stargazers, masters of celestial cycles. Their calendar tracked Venus to the hour. Why wouldn't they imagine or remember what the stars once held? Pakal was no ordinary king. His rule was long, his tomb elaborate, his legacy wrapped in riddles. And some believe he didn't die, but ascended, body and spirit, into the sky. Not in metaphor, in motion. The temple itself was designed with astronomical precision, its stairs aligned to the setting sun on solstice, and its secret tomb, hidden until 1952, waited beneath it all. When I placed my palm against that stone lid, I felt the coolness of centuries. Not just stone, but signal, a story told in code. Symbols not meant for everyone, just for those who look twice. Maybe Pakal wasn't an astronaut. Maybe he didn't ride fire into the stars. But someone wanted us to consider it, to look up from the dirt of history and wonder. Because buried in that chamber is a king who sleeps like a traveler, and above him, a vehicle, a dream, or a memory. We left the tomb in silence, birdsong above, roots curling through stone, and I kept seeing his face, not in death, but in motion. Another mystery carved in defiance of time. Another echo. That doesn't fit the script, but maybe the script was never meant to hold it all. The jungle breathed around us. Thick vines curled like fingers through the canopy. Bird calls echoed from unseen branches. And then the green broke, and something impossible emerged. A shape, too precise, too perfect. Half sunken in the earth like a fossilized planet. A stone sphere, smooth as water-worn bone. Dark, heavy, ancient, its surface untouched by chaos. It shouldn't have been there, but it was. Then another, and another. Dozens, scattered across the clearing, lined up through underbrush, nestled beneath root and vine. Each one a silent sentinel in stone. We had found them. The enigmatic Diki spheres, a legacy of a civilization that left no cities, no books, no voices, only these. They range in size, from the weight of an apple to the mass of a van. The largest, 16 tons of flawless symmetry, carved from granodiorite, volcanic, unyielding, quarried miles from here. How did they move them? Across rivers, through mountains, without wheels, without beasts of burden, without a trace. And, more baffling still, how did they shape them? No tool marks, no chisels, no seams, just stone, smooth to perfection. The Dikis people, gone before the first Spanish sails pierced the horizon, left no written language, no blueprints, no artisans' signatures, only these mute giants, carved in the silence of a forest that keeps its secrets. When conquistadors first heard of them, they tore them open, expecting gold, expecting gods, but found only the hollow sound of their own misunderstanding. Some spheres align in patterns, straight lines stretching across hillsides, triangles etched into the land. A few appear to trace solstices, pointing quietly toward the stars. Were they calendars? Were they maps? Were they memory? Modern engineers have tried to recreate them with lasers, with CAD modeling, and still they fall short. Whatever method shaped these stones, it's lost, erased, buried with the hands that wielded it. I crouched beside one, its surface warm under the filtered sunday. Lichen clung to its base like forgotten script. I placed my hand on it, felt a stillness deeper than stone, as if the sphere was waiting, not just to be found, but to be understood. But we don't understand. We categorize, we theorize, we argue. Some call them ceremonial, some say astronomical. Others claim they're symbols of power, markers of territory, or remnants of some Atlantean past. But no one knows. There are no unfinished spheres, no failed attempts, only perfection, repeated and abandoned. And so they remain, not quite buried, not quite revealed, scattered through Costa Rica like punctuation marks. In a sentence we've never read, they defy the laws of erosion, of transport, of time. They remind us that precision is not a modern invention. That mystery is not a hole in knowledge. It's a boundary, one we're meant to cross slowly, carefully, respectfully. I walked between them as the jungle reclaimed its stillness, and for a moment, it felt like they were watching or remembering. Another voice from the lost world, another question in stone that history isn't ready to answer, not yet. The canopy closed overhead like a living roof, green upon green, a ceiling of tangled branches veined with sunlight. From above, it looked seamless, untouched, impenetrable. But as we soared over the forest in a small plain, the illusion broke, and the earth began to speak. Beneath the trees, geometric shapes emerged. Circles, squares, lines etched with ancient intent. Massive patterns cut into the soil, patterns no one was meant to see from the ground. They call them geoglyphs, found mostly in Acre, Brazil. Over 450 of them, and counting. Perfectly formed ditches, some spanning over 300 meters wide. Interlocking designs, aligned with astronomical precision. These weren't animal pens. These weren't tribal camps. These were blueprints, city plans, calendars perhaps, or messages left for the sky. For centuries, we believed the Amazon was a wild void, a place too hostile for civilization, too vast, too lush, too unforgiving. But the soil says otherwise. Charcoal-rich earth called terra preta blankets the region near the glyphs. Artificial soil, human-made, still fertile after centuries. This wasn't a jungle of scattered tribes. It was a garden, tended, engineered, populated. Some estimates now suggest millions once lived here, in organized settlements, connected by roadways, by rivers, by stars. Then the jungle took it back. The vines grew silent, and history forgot, until satellite imaging and a few brave expeditions began peeling back the green. I stood at the edge of one of the circles, the trench carved with unnatural symmetry. I walked its curve, feeling the scale of it in my bones. This had been deliberate, mathematical, measured. But by whom? The glyphs predate the Inca. Some date back over 2,000 years. There are no written records, no myths that survived, only this code in the earth. Some believe these were ceremonial centers, open-air temples aligned with solstices. Others think they mark territories, settlements governed by celestial rhythms. But a few, quietly, suggest something more, that the geoglyphs form a vast network, like a circuit board, a design not just of culture, but of consciousness. The patterns repeat across great distances, like echoes of the same thought, spoken in a forgotten tongue. If this was a civilization, it was a mindful one, a people in tune with their environment, not at odds with it. They shaped the forest without clearing it, planted without stripping, built without conquering. And maybe that's why they disappeared. Not in blood, not in fire, but in silence. Swallowed not by violence, but by the very jungle they understood so well. Now, slowly, their world is re-emerging from the air, from the roots, from the shadows. I spoke with a local guide. He said the forest remembers, that sometimes, after heavy rain, the glyphs hum. I don't know if that's true, but standing there, in the heart of that ancient pattern, I felt something stir, a pulse, like the land had memory. We used to think the Amazon was untouched, virgin, pristine. But it was a city, a network, a world. And now, that world is speaking again. Another chapter hidden beneath the vines. Another map redrawn in root and ruin. Another civilization we ignored, because it didn't build with stone. But here, where leaves whisper in forgotten dialects, history rises from the soil itself. The wind howled off the sea, dragging mist across the cliffs of South Wales. Below, a cave mouth yawned open, dark, ancient, still. We descended at dawn, boots crunching against damp stone. The smell of salt and cold earth clung to the air. Inside, the cave was a cathedral of silence. The walls closed in, and time unraveled. At the far end, half buried in ochre-stained soil, she waited, curled in death, bones tinted red, as if the earth itself had mocked her passing. We call her the Red Lady of Paviland. But she wasn't a lady, and she wasn't recent. She was found in 1823. A partial skeleton coated in red ochre, surrounded by tools, ivory rods, and fragments of jewelry. At first, scholars thought she was Roman, a noblewoman, a temple priestess. But they were wrong. The bones belonged to a young man, likely in his early 20s, a hunter, or perhaps something more. And he was no Roman. He lived over 33,000 years ago. That made him the oldest ceremonial burial in Britain. By far, it wasn't just the age. It was the implication, because we weren't supposed to be there. Not then. At the height of the last ice age, glaciers gripped the land. Bitter cold ruled the island. And yet, someone not only survived, they honored their dead. This was no hasty grave. It was ritual. Painted bone, ivory pendants, and a final gesture of care. In a world on the edge of extinction, the ochre wasn't accidental. It was sacred, symbolic. A blood-colored link between body and spirit. And in this cave, sheltered from wind and time, that link endured. Some say he was part of the Gravettian culture, a group spread across Ice Age Europe, nomadic, yet deeply artistic. They carved Venus figurines, etched bone with constellations, mapped the sky from the mouths of caves. His people knew the stars, the seasons, the cycles of life and death. And they buried him as they would a prince. But why here? Why Britain? When the land was so harsh, it wasn't an accident. Paviland Cave sits near a natural limestone arch, a kind of portal between worlds, a threshold, perhaps they believed. This place touched both earth and sky. That here, their dead could walk between. We tested the bones again in the late 20th century, and again in the 21st. Each time, the result was older, more precise. 33,000 years. Confirmed. And still, the textbooks hesitate. The narrative resists. Because he doesn't fit. His grave suggests symbolism, artistry, culture. But our model of prehistory, the slow climb from savagery to civilization, can't hold him. So it tries to forget. But the bones remain, red-stained, resting in the curve of a cave that still catches the morning light. I placed my hand near the spot where he lay, and the cold came through the stone, but so did something else, a kind of reverence, not for what we found, but for what he meant. We didn't begin with ignorance. We began with memory, and the Red Lady. This young man draped in ochre reminds us. Another crack in the timeline. Another echo from before the story began. Not a relic. A messenger. The blast echoed off the granite. A deep roar swallowed by stone. It was 1851. Dorchester, Massachusetts. A routine demolition. Just another day breaking rock. But what they uncovered shouldn't have existed. The workers sifted through the rubble, expecting debris. Nothing more. Instead, they found a vessel, shattered clean in two, embedded within solid stone, not in dirt, not beneath rubble, inside the rock itself. It was metallic, bell-shaped, about 6 inches high, 8 inches wide at the base. Delicate, elegant, unmistakably crafted. Its surface was adorned with floral inlays, vines of silver, leaves etched with care, and 2 alloys, zinc and silver, blended seamlessly. This wasn't natural. This wasn't accidental. This was engineered. And the rock it came from? The Roxbury conglomerate, estimated to be over 600 million years old. That's Precambrian. before dinosaurs, before trees, before most life as we know it. The implications are staggering. Some said it had slipped into a crack, that the rock was newer than believed, but geologists stood firm. This was ancient bedrock, unyielding, undisturbed. So how did a metal object, designed with artistry, end up inside it? Mainstream scholars dismissed it, called it an anomaly, a misidentification, maybe a Victorian relic. That contaminated the site. But no records match its design. No known culture made anything like it. Not in America. Not in that time. Not with that metallurgy. The Dorchester vessel disappeared soon after, vanished into private hands. No museum, no follow-up, only a sketch, published in an old scientific journal, and a handful of witness statements. But that sketch, it looks eerily modern, like a precision-made component, like something that belonged in a machine, or a power source, a capacitor, a beacon. If it's real, it rewrites everything. It suggests that at some point, hundreds of millions of years ago, someone had knowledge of metallurgy, of engineering, of aesthetics, and that they left behind a single artifact that somehow survived. The crush of time. It's not the only anomaly, not the only object found where none should be, but it's among the most perplexing because it doesn't scream for attention. It's not alien-looking, not bizarre. It's beautiful, simple, refined, as if the hand that made it had done so many times before. I often wonder, what else is locked in the stone beneath our cities? What lies just a few meters too deep to be considered possible? When I think of the Dorchester vessel, I think of a clock, buried and forgotten, still ticking in the dark. We build our timeline like a fortress, everything in its place, linear, predictable. But the Earth doesn't care. It holds what it holds. And sometimes, it cracks just wide enough for us to glimpse what came before, or what was never supposed to be. As I stood near the site, now just part of the sprawl of a modern town, I imagined the vessel whole, resting in a chamber of stone, waiting for the blast, waiting for a world that could ask the right questions. Another artifact that shouldn't exist. Another whisper from a world beneath our feet. And once more, the familiar thought returned. We are not the first. The cave swallowed the light. Damp air pressed against my skin. The walls shimmered with moisture, as if sweating from the weight of memory. This was Lascaux, France, a sanctuary sealed for over 17,000 years. We weren't the first to find it, but we were still trespassers. Our boots disturbed dust that hadn't moved since the Ice Age. And on the walls, a world awoke. Horses, bison, deer mid-leap, painted in ochre, charcoal, and manganese black. Alive with motion, frozen in time. Each stroke felt deliberate, fluid, emotional. Not just art, witness. And then, above the animals, something else. Dots, lines, clusters of symbols, etched and painted with precision. We stared, we traced, we compared, and it hit us. We weren't just looking at animals, we were looking at constellations. Some matched the Pleiades, others Taurus. One section mirrored Orion's belt, almost exactly. This wasn't cave graffiti. It was a celestial map, drawn by people who shouldn't have known the sky so well. They had no telescopes, no language at least, None we found. But they watched the heavens, tracked them, immortalized them, and not just anywhere. They did it underground. Why? Why drag torches deep into the earth? To paint stars on stone? Maybe the cave wasn't a refuge. Maybe it was a planetarium, a sacred space where the sky was brought to earth. They painted eclipses, lunar phases, patterns of animal migration, tied to the turning heavens. They weren't guessing. They were remembering. Who taught them? What did they inherit? Was this knowledge passed down or rediscovered? Some believe it was instinct. Others, coincidence. But I don't. You feel it when you stand in that chamber. That these weren't just hunters. They were astronomers. And not just observers of stars, but believers in their power. They painted with reverence, with purpose, not for survival, for meaning. Even the layout of the chambers matches celestial movement, spirals, vortexes, pathways between worlds. One figure, a man with a bird's head, appears to die beneath a bull. A myth? A constellation? A ritual encoded in paint? No one knows. The deeper we went, the more the air felt charged, like the cave held breath from another age. And maybe it did. Scientists say the pigments are stable. That's why they've lasted so long. But I believe it's more than chemistry. I believe the cave wanted to be remembered. Lascaux was sealed for thousands of years. By accident or design, it was preserved, perfect, until we opened it. And the air changed, and the paintings began to fade. They closed it again, built a replica. But the real cave, it waits, silent, still watching the stars. When I left, I turned back at the entrance, and the thought struck me. They weren't painting the world around them. They were painting the world above them, from a memory too old to name. Another echo in stone. Another mind, looking up, long before we thought it could. And in that moment, beneath the weight of the earth, I realized they weren't primitive. They were precise. And perhaps, in some ways, more connected than we are. The mountain wind howled like a distant voice. Sharp, dry, and ancient. We stood on the high plateau of the Altai, where Russia touches Mongolia, and the sky feels closer than the earth. Snow still clung to the peaks in summer. Permafrost gripped the soil like a fist. We dug carefully, layer by layer, until the coffin emerged from the frozen ground. A chamber of ice and larch, buried deep in the steppe, untouched for over 2,500 years. Inside, she waited, curled in death, shrouded in silk and felt, adorned with jewelry, and a crown of wooden antlers. They called her the Siberian Ice Maiden, but locals whispered another name. Ukok Princess. She wasn't royalty in the way we understand it. She was something older. A guardian, a keeper of memory. Her skin, still pale after 2.5 millennia, carried ink. Elaborate tattoos danced down her arms. Griffins, stags, serpents, creatures no longer seen. Outside of myth, the lines were precise, flowing, symbolic. They weren't for decoration. They were language. Spellwork etched in flesh. Whoever she was, she held power. Some believe she was a priestess of the Pazyryk people, nomads of the Scythian world, horse lords, sky readers, burial artists. They mummified their dead, not with fire or tombs, but with ice. permafrost sealed their memories. As if time itself had paused in reverence, her burial chamber was a world unto itself. Cushions of moss and bark, a yurt's interior recreated underground. Even in death, she traveled with purpose. Beside her, 6 horses were laid to rest, saddled, bridled, waiting to carry her into whatever lay beyond. And that's what haunted me. Not the preservation, not the mystery, but the intention. This was not a forgotten corpse. It was a voyage, a ceremony frozen in motion. And when the archaeologists opened her chamber in 1993, the storm came, literally. The day they lifted her body, the winds screamed across the plateau. Thunder cracked open the sky. Locals warned them. She was protected, and now she was disturbed. They say her spirit was tethered to the land, that removing her broke something sacred. Since then, the region has seen tremors, unrest, unexplained phenomena. The elders still speak of her, with reverence, with fear. They say she was buried where the sky meets the earth, because she held the stars in her body. And when I looked at her tattoos, the way they coiled around her arm, flowing with breath and rhythm, I believed them. She wasn't just marked, she was mapped, a record of a people who saw no line between the spirit and the body, the sky and the skin. And though she lay in silence for millennia, her story erupted the moment the ice melted. We sent her to labs. We cataloged her bones. We debated her diet, her illness, her age, but none of that captured who she was. Only the stillness of that chamber, the scent of cold wood, the flicker of torchlight on horsehair, came close. I left the plateau with snow in my boots, and the feeling I'd just trespassed on something eternal. Another voice from the cold, another soul inked in secrets, another life that breaks the neat borders of history. The jungle steamed, a wet heat rising off the ground like breath. We moved carefully, machetes slicing through vines that resisted like memory. Somewhere beneath our boots, a city slept. We were deep in Belize, near the ruins of Luba Antun. Broken walls peeked through the foliage. Stone blocks without mortar, balanced like a puzzle, held together by time alone. And then we saw it. A glint, something bright among the roots. Half buried, half watching, we dug, hands trembling, and from the earth, we lifted a skull, clear, perfect, carved entirely from quartz crystal, full-size, human, flawless. No cracks, no seams, no tool marks, just cold, gleaming silence. They call it the Mitchell-Hedges skull, named after the explorer who claimed to have found it, or whose daughter did, on her 17th birthday, in the ruins beneath our feet. The story is debated, challenged, denied, but the object is real, too real. We took it to laboratories, microscopes, lasers. Experts from Hewlett-Packard stared in disbelief. It had been carved against the natural axis of the quartz, a process that should have shattered it. It would take decades of gentle abrasion to shape. And still, modern tools can't replicate it cleanly. The skull even has a detachable jaw, fitted so precisely, it clicks into place, like engineered machinery. And then there's the light. When placed under direct sun, the crystal channels it, refracts it, makes it glow from within. Some claim it emits energy, a vibration, a hum. When I held it, only for a moment, it felt alive, heavy not just with weight, but with presence. There are legends tied to it. Some say it's one of 13, scattered across the world, and when united, they'll reveal something forgotten. Others say it's a relic from Atlantis, or brought by beings not born of this planet. I don't know what to believe, but I know this. The skull should not exist. Not as it is, not with what we know about stonework, or tools, or time. Some argue it's modern, a hoax, a 20th century carving passed off as ancient. But then, why can't we reproduce it? Why did the best crystal engineers in the world walk away scratching their heads? It doesn't bear the marks of fraud. It bears the silence of precision. There's no inscription, no date, no clear origin, just eyes, hollow, and knowing. Some say the skull speaks in dreams, that those who own it see visions, lose time, hear whispers. I don't chase stories like that. But in the moment I stood with it in that ruined city, everything felt still, too still, like the jungle was holding its breath. Artifacts usually speak of the past, of cultures long faded, but this one felt ahead of us, like it was waiting for time to catch up. We eventually left the site, skull in hand, but something stayed behind, or followed. I still think of its jaw, clicking into place. Not decorative, functional, like a switch. Another object that breaks the story. Another riddle carved in perfect silence. Another mind. That worked with tools we do not yet understand. The pyramid loomed above us, massive, silent, as if it had grown from the stone itself. This was Teotihuacan, the city of the gods, dead for over 1,000 years. Before the Aztecs even found it, they gave it a name, but not the answers. The Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent, low and wide, its face covered in snarling stone serpents. But beneath it, something waited. We had scanned the ground with radar and resonance, looking for voids. And there it was, a tunnel, hidden for centuries, sealed with purpose. We began to dig, slowly, cautiously. Earth gave way to stone, then to mica. Then, the walls opened. A tunnel nearly 340 feet long, perfectly aligned, lined with mica sheets. A mineral used today for electronics, heat shields. But here, in an ancient tomb, it didn't end in rubble. It ended in ritual. At the heart of the tunnel, we found liquid mercury, pools of it, still shimmering under torchlight, still deadly, still cold. It was a river flowing through the underworld, or at least a vision of it. In Mesoamerican myth, Mercury didn't exist, not as a concept, not in nature. So how did they find it? Refine it? Contain it? And why here? The chamber around it was filled with spheres. Metal, golden, perfect, hundreds of them, scattered like stars. Across a galaxy of stone, some think they were offerings, others, tools, but no one can say for certain. Above the tunnel, the temple rose, and beneath it, a world constructed, not for the living, but for the journey beyond. We had always believed the dead here were buried in tears. But this was architecture for souls. And mercury, a metal that glows without fire, moves without touch, may have been the river that carried them. The Aztecs believed the gods built Teotihuacan, that it was where the sun was born and where the last age ended, in fire. Maybe they weren't wrong, because this city wasn't tribal. It wasn't a village that grew. It appeared, planned, gridded, engineered, with roads, complex drainage, even apartment blocks. And under the temple, this tunnel, like a circuit, connecting the dead to something vast. Mercury is rare, toxic, unstable. But here it was used, with intent. Why? Some believe it represented water, others the Milky Way, or blood. But I stood at its edge, lantern in hand, and thought of mirrors, portals, and things that reflect not what we are, but what we hide. The tunnel was eventually resealed, deemed too dangerous, the mercury too volatile. But its presence remains. A question suspended in metal. This wasn't just a burial. It was a message from people who mapped not only stars, but the steps between worlds. Teotihuacan still holds its dead. In chambers, in walls, in breathless silence. But beneath it, in that hidden river, lies a path no one has walked in 1,000 years. Another passage lost. Another law of history quietly broken. The desert was still, hot wind curling over stone. Red cliffs shimmered in the distance, like memory caught in heat. We were in Chaco Canyon, a place carved from silence. A land of ruins that watched the sky. And there, rising from the canyon floor, was Fajada Butte, a sandstone tower, sacred, sealed, and for centuries, forgotten. Until someone climbed it. They found the trail hidden, twisting, narrow, meant for those who knew where to look. And at the summit, a ledge and 3 stone slabs leaning against the cliff like teeth. Behind them, a spiral etched into the wall. Simple, beautiful, and impossibly precise. Then came the solstice, June 21st, and light, like a blade from heaven, cut through the stones. A single dagger of sunlight pierced the spiral, landing perfectly in its center. No guesswork, no chance, just light and design. The same happened in winter, but the light moved differently. 2 daggers this time, framing the spiral on either side. Equinoxes too, each season marked by shifting sunlight and perfect geometry. This wasn't art. This was a calendar, a celestial machine, made of nothing but stone and shadow. And it was built by the ancestral Puebloans, centuries before Europeans knew these lands existed. They didn't have metal, or compasses, or written records, but they had the Sunday, and they had time to shape a clock out of cliffs. The spiral itself isn't large, just a few feet wide, but its precision is staggering. Tilted walls, aligned slabs, all positioned to track not just seasons, but the rhythm of the earth. This wasn't isolated. All through Chaco, buildings aligned to solstices. Doorways frame sunsets. Walls track lunar cycles that take 18.6 years to complete. 18 years to observe, to wait, to build. Who were these people that watched the heavens more patiently than we ever have? I stood beneath the slabs at midday. The wind whispered across the butte. And as the sun moved, the dagger appeared. It didn't flash. It didn't announce itself. It simply was. A line of light, etched through time. The modern world often forgets that ancient people were not primitive. They were attentive, deliberate, alive in ways we've lost. Fajada Butte wasn't just a hill. It was an observatory, a temple, a bridge between earth and sky. But it's fragile, foot traffic shifted the stones. They've since been closed off, protected, watched. Because now, even we don't understand how the slabs held their angle so long. But maybe that's part of it. The mystery, the patience, a spiral in the rock. That turns not with hands, but with light. I left the butte with sand in my boots, and the scent. That I'd seen a kind of truth. We weren't supposed to forget. Another moment carved into stone. Another whisper in shadow and Sunday. Another law of history. Measured not in years, but in light. The sun beat down on the ruins. Golden light spilled across broken columns, and at the edge of the hill, the earth gave way to something massive. Baalbek, once known as Heliopolis, city of the Sunday, nestled in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, a site built and rebuilt by cultures long erased. But at its heart, it holds a mystery that refuses to move. We stood at the Temple of Jupiter, Roman ruins, majestic but explainable. Columns 40 feet tall, stone blocks weighing dozens of tons, but below them, a foundation of impossible stone. 3 megaliths, perfectly cut, perfectly aligned, known as the trilithon. Each stone weighs around 800 tons. That's nearly 1.6 million pounds. And they weren't just dropped into place. They were raised, positioned, set with precision so fine, you couldn't slide a blade between them. Below them, even larger stones rest, still embedded in the quarry. One, nicknamed the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighs over 1,000 tons. Another, found more recently, heavier still, and no one can explain how they were moved. The Romans were master builders, but even their records offer no clue. They built on top of these stones, not beneath them, which suggests the megaliths came first. By whom? We don't know. With what? We don't know. Modern cranes struggle to lift loads over 300 tons. To move an 800-ton stone, even today, would require special equipment, custom built, on solid ground. But Baalbek is on a hill, sloped, uneven, and these stones were dragged from a quarry nearly a kilometer away. No wheels, no pulleys, no written plans, just stones that defy the weight of reason. Some theories say ramps, hundreds of men, greased logs, but try building a ramp strong enough to support that weight. It would stretch for miles. Others suggest sonic technology, vibration, sound used to levitate matter. Legends speak of priests who sang the stones into place. Too fantastical? Maybe, but more honest than pretending it was easy. I stood beside the stone of the pregnant woman. It towered above me, warm in the Sunday, still half buried, as if earth itself couldn't quite cover the truth. There were no inscriptions, no decoration, just mass, pure raw mass. And yet, it felt designed, shaped with purpose, as if the act of moving it was more important than the stone itself. Who had the knowledge to work on this scale? What civilization had the confidence to place stones heavier than modern machines can handle? And why build something so vast in a place so remote? Some say it was a launch site, a platform for the gods, a power center built for beings larger than us. The name Baalbek links it to Baal, a storm god, a sky god. Perhaps the temple was built not to honor, but to house. I don't know, but I've seen cathedrals, skyscrapers, mega projects of steel and light, and still, nothing humbles you, like a stone that refuses to be moved. Another impossibility, cut into the earth. Another monument to a forgotten strength. Not just an artifact, a statement. The wind screamed across the Antarctic plateau, endless white. A desert of ice, where nothing grows and nothing forgets. We were 13,000 feet above sea level, but standing on nearly 2 miles of ice. Below us, a lake sealed for over 20 million years. Lake Vostok, buried beneath the frozen continent, untouched, untamed, unknown. The Soviets discovered it in the 1,970 seconds. Using radar, they were looking for nothing and found everything. A liquid lake, hidden under crushing pressure, warmed by geothermal heat from the Earth's core. But that wasn't the mystery. It was what came after. As they scanned the lake, a strange formation emerged. Not a cave, not a crack. A dome. Symmetrical. Artificial in shape. Embedded in the ice. It wasn't ice. It wasn't rock. It was something else. A structure. Immediately, the tone shifted. Drilling slowed, then stopped. The official story? Risk of contamination. The lake's ecosystem too fragile, too pure. But whispers began to circulate. Some claimed the instruments malfunctioned. When pointed toward the dome, others said strange magnetic fields were recorded, then erased. And then, silence. Scientists were evacuated. Research classified. The data missing. The scans redacted. What lies beneath the ice? We don't know. Not officially. But those who've studied the anomalies point to a few facts. The dome is massive, nearly 300 feet across. Smooth, geometrically sound. No known geological process can explain its shape. Some believe it's a natural vault. Others, a machine, buried, asleep, waiting. There are rumors of microbial life in the lake, life untouched by surface evolution. But what if it's not alone? What if the lake wasn't just sealed by nature, but intentionally closed? Some draw comparisons to Dyatlov Pass, to Nazi bases, to ancient alien theories. Too far? Perhaps, but the secrecy doesn't help the doubt. When I stood at Vostok Station, the cold bit through layers of gear. The sky was a sheet of steel. No birds, no sound. Only the crunch of boots on snow. And beneath us, that dark mirror lake, that unseen dome, that pulse, waiting in the deep. We've sent probes to the edges of our solar system. We've mapped the seafloor, traced stars across light years. But here, under our own feet, we look away. Because it doesn't fit. If it's artificial, it predates the ice. It predates us. So who built it? Why bury it? And why does no one want to open it? Lake Vostok isn't just a body of water. It's a time capsule, a pressure chamber, a tomb, or a gateway. And the dome? The machine? Whatever it is, it's still down there. Another silence, too perfect to be natural. Another fragment. That doesn't belong. We left the site with frost on our eyelashes and questions in our lungs. But the feeling lingers. Even now, that something below is watching, not sleeping, just waiting. Another mystery that breaks the laws of history. Not in stone, not in bone, but in ice. And perhaps in memory. Night falls slowly in these places. Not like the city, where light chokes out the dark, but gently, like an old curtain drawn across the sky. I'm alone now, campfire low, journal open. The scent of ash and old paper mingles with the wind, and I think back to the ice, the stone, the soil, the shadows beneath ancient ceilings. Each discovery was a fragment, a broken clock, a misplaced whisper, a law rewritten in silence. We found writing older than writing, footprints beside giants, machines inside mountains, skulls that spoke without sound, and rivers of Mercury that ran through the dead. None of it fits. Not neatly, not comfortably. But maybe that's the point. Because history, as it was written, is too smooth, too convenient. It forgets that wonder was once the way we navigated truth. And standing among these mysteries, you begin to feel it. That history doesn't just whisper. It waits. In caves that echo with star maps, in stones carved by forgotten hands, in tombs where the dead wear stories on their skin. It waits for someone not to answer, but to listen. And so I listen. Not for explanations, but for patterns, for intentions that survived the centuries, even if their names did not. Because the more I see, the more I believe. We are not alone in time. We are not the first to shape, to seek, to dream. We are only the latest to forget. The expedition will continue. There are more ruins, more shadows, more laws waiting to be broken by truths we're not yet ready to remember. But tonight, with the stars above and the fire low, I write this. Another page turned, another thread tugged loose from the veil we call history. And out there, in the forgotten places, something ancient still watches, still waits.